if you play Invisible Sun, it really will change the way you play role-playing games. And here's kind of what I mean by that. So there are a lot of challenges to playing role-playing games in 2016, 2017, right? We've all got busy schedules. You've got players who can't always show up. Sometimes you try to play online. Sometimes you're playing at home around the table. Sometimes you can't get together. Lots of problems. We basically have identified that the biggest competitor to role-playing games is, of course, real life. And so, Invisible Sun creates a system where there are 3 modes of play. And I'm going to get back to that in a minute, because first I'm going to tell you a story. When I was a kid, in fact, when Bruce and I were kids together growing up in junior high, we were avid D&D players, right? If you guys have seen Stranger Things, right? Those kids, they were us. And we would walk home every day together. And, even though we played D&D like on Friday night and whatever, we just on the walk home, we would start talking about the game, and we would say, next time we play, I'm going to go talk to the priestess of Lolth and see what she has to say about this thing and whatever, and we'd be talking, and suddenly, I as the game master would say, well, what would you say to her, right? And on the way home, we are actually starting to play the game while we're walking, and realizing that, at that point, we don't need character sheets, we don't need dice or whatever. It's all just the interaction between the game master and the players. And for whatever it's been now, 35 years, I have wanted to capture that essence, that way, that acknowledgement that there is a richness to role-playing games that can exist away from the game table. So, actually, there's another story I want to tell that is a different story, but it ties in all together. Much later in my life, I was running a Dungeons & Dragons game, and I had invited she wasn't a brand new player to the game, but she was a brand new player who had never played with me. And, I started noticing a few sessions had gone by, and she wasn't very engaged, right? She didn't get involved in the conversation. She kind of, was quiet. And, I started to worry. I said, maybe she's just not enjoying it. Maybe I need to talk to her and find out if there's something that we can do differently. What's going on? Is, are one of the other players bugging her or whatever, right? And I talked to her and I started asking her about, what she thought about the game. And suddenly she began explaining, what her character thought about all these different things that had happened in the game. And she just went on and on and on. And I talked to her for probably 45 minutes about, my character doesn't like this guy, but she really liked it when this happened. And she just went on and on and on. And what I realized was she had this really rich gaming experience that was all going on sort of internally. And wasn't expressing it necessarily very much at the table, but she was still loving the game and really enjoying it. So those two experiences together kind of sat with me and made me realize there are lots of ways to play these games. And so let's embrace that. Let's create a game that works with that idea. And so I'm going to get back to what I was talking about with the 3 modes of play in Invisible Sun. And you already know the first 2, right? The first one is sort of the action mode, right? It's where you've got round by round, people are taking an action, you're going around the table, everyone gets an action at the same time, whatever, right? Whether it's combat or, avoiding boulders rolling down a hill, right? You just kind of manage everything that way. The second mode you also know, right? That's we're not keeping track of rounds, we're not worrying about that, everyone's just, we're traveling, we're talking to NPCs, we are, in town buying stuff, right? There's that whole level. But Invisible Sun introduces a 3rd level. And what this level is the level that exists away from the game table entirely. And the really cool thing about this is that this can be something that is GM-driven, or it can be something that is player-driven. When we launch the Kickstarter, we're going to show another video. That is about 95% of what the main Kickstarter video will be. But we also have a gameplay video. And in that gameplay video, you'll watch as the characters, at the table, they confront something and they don't know how they're going to deal with it, right? It's a place they can't get into. So one of the players has this idea, and she says, maybe my character has been here before, because that fits into her background. And so then she and I, because I'm the game master in the video, we go off to a coffee shop, right? And we're playing in this third mode of play where she and I are talking through. It's not just completely open-ended. There is a mode of play. There are these things that I don't want to bog down in the details too much, but there are these things called story points that we figure in, and we make it possible so that she and I play through this flashback scene where we determine that yes, she has been there before, and because of things that she did successfully figure out how one gets inside this library. And so then when we cut to next week's session at the table, she knows what to do, right? And it all fits into her background, and it makes perfect sense. Now, not all of these side scenes in this mode of play need to be flashbacks. They can be, there's a point at which a session can end at that we call a pivot point. And if you reach a pivot point, you can move on to the next scene with the whole group, or the group itself can break off and say, well, I'm gonna go, look up this in the library. Well, I'm gonna go talk to this guy. Well, I'm gonna go sneak into the other place. And we can handle those outside of the table, away from the table. We can do that in person. We can do that via email, or we're going to have an app that is going to allow you to interact with the GM and the players, so that you can be sending messages back and forth. And in this mode of play, you won't be using dice, but you'll be using the cards. And the GM will be able to send cards through the app and show you what card and what effect it will have on what you're doing. And that will be the thing that sort of determines the randomness, because we need a little bit of randomness in what's going on. We need to determine if you succeed or fail at what you try to do. So that is what we think of as being one of the more innovative aspects of Invisible Sun. But the other thing that I wanted to talk about really briefly is, remember the story that I told you about where my friend, I didn't think she was enjoying the game because she was really quiet, but in fact she was enjoying it quite a bit. Well, she's really an introvert, right? Everything is internal for her. The Invisible Sun mechanics are going to be designed with both introverts and extroverts in mind. And there are going to be different ways of doing things based on player preferences, right? So we're going to address, some people, at the end of the game session, again, kind of talking about those story points, you talk about what happened in the game, and everyone gives feedback on how what happened in the game figures into their stories, and that's how they're going to get the various kinds of experience points. We don't use that term, but we actually call them joy and despair. Certain things will give you joy, other things will give you despair. You can use both of those, you just use them in different ways. If you're an introvert, though, and you don't really feel like talking about that at the table, you can do it offline, right? You can, or online for that matter, but you can do that through the app. You can interact with the game and the game master however you want to. All right, so I want to talk very, very briefly about the setting. The setting, well, if you can imagine, if Numenera is weird, and the strange is strange, Invisible Sun is surreal. It's a place where we recognize that all of this that is around us is not real. This is actually what is referred to as shadow. And player characters are, they're called Vizli. And Vizli have been exiled in shadow for a very long time, but now they are returning to the real world, which is called the actuality. And in the actuality, we discover that basically everything that here in shadow that seems weird and dreamlike and crazy and impossible, that's all normal reality in the actuality. So that is the world in which characters inhabit. And so, maybe you're asking yourself, well, what does surrealistic fantasy actually mean? That's a term we used in the video, and I've talked about it a couple of times. So in a surrealistic fantasy, you might be going to visit an NPC that you've got to talk to, or maybe the villain, right? But he doesn't live in a castle, right? He lives within the dying flame of the last candle, still burning in a lonely monastery on one particular night, right? And you have to figure out how to reach that place. You might attend a party that is hosted within the altered consciousness of the actual attendees. You might go on a quest for the lost and now forbidden number that once lay between 12 and 13. And you might encounter a villain who steals concepts. He steals concepts. Or you might have to deal with a virus that manifests itself in reality as mirrors that keeps spreading every time we're not looking, with the ultimate goal of reflecting everything in reality. And the rumor is that if these mirrors manage to do that, everything inverts and the reflection becomes the new reality. So that's what surrealistic fantasy is to me. That's the kind of adventures that you can expect to be going on in this game. It's going to be wild and crazy, and if you've followed my career at all, and you know my work on D&D and D20 and whatnot, I love wizards. You know that magic is my thing, and this is the game where I really want to make magic magical again, right? I want to make it not mechanical. I want to make it so that it's weird and wondrous, and when you are interacting with magic, it just blows your mind every single time. That's the way magic should be, I think. And that's what we're going to try to accomplish with this. That's where those sooth cards come in, because they're always changing things, and when you're using magic, it changes things. You also saw what we call the Path of Suns. That's what's on those t-shirts. The Path of Suns is sort of a map of reality, but it is also a map of the human spirit. And so it exists on two levels. Reality exists both within and without. And so each one of those symbols represents a different sun, and they're all connected by the Path of Suns. And the ninth, which does not lie on the Path of Suns, but just off of it, is the Invisible Sun. That's the source of magic. Currents of magic flow through the other suns from the Invisible Sun. But we'll get into that another time. And so, some of you actually might be thinking, because I know I would, right? What does this have to do with that old Police song, The Invisible Sun? And the answer is, I think that the origin of that song, the inspiration for that song, actually comes from the same place that the inspiration of the game came from. And it's a quote from Sir Thomas Browne back in 1658, which is, "Life is a pure flame, and we live by an invisible sun within us." And that's what this game is all about, right? It is about human spirit and how it manifests and changes the world. So, it is one couple more things, I promise, and then I won't keep droning on and on. As you kind of gathered probably from the video, Invisible Sun is a game of secrets. And we mean that on two levels. This is a game where, characters are, that's primarily what characters are going to be going to do. They're going to be discovering new secrets and figuring out how the world works. What is the truth of the actuality? In fact, there is this thing that lies sort of at the edge of the actuality called the labyrinth. And it is the ultimate goal of many Vizsli to figure out not only how to get to the labyrinth, but how to pass through it and to discover what lies beyond. But Invisible Sun's also a game of secrets that are actually you are going to interact with as the players and the GMs. The books that you are going to get with the game are going to have secrets in them. The game itself is you're gonna want to pore over this game. In the illustrations, there are going to be secrets hidden within things. There are going to be things that you're not going to realize what's going on entirely on page 27 until you get to page 103 and you realize that these things match up, right? It is a game where there's going to be hidden information all the time. There might actually even be secret places in this box where you will find new information. So, you know, we're going to be kind of reinforcing that with stuff that we're going to be doing on the website. And I really encourage you, starting today, to go to a URL that's, I think it's on the magnets that you got, pathofsuns.com.
It's on your shirts too.
It's on the shirts too. Pathofsuns.com, what you're going to find there are secrets. And they come in many, many forms. And it's going to start with a secret on the first sun, and you're going to follow the path of suns. It's going to be updated every single day between now and when the Kickstarter launches. And if you keep visiting that site, you're going to find more and more stuff. There are also some strange numbers on that site, and they may lead you to something as well if you're really adventurous.